Right now, this is a real victory for Ukraine. Good news. Trump lashed out at Russia. Ships and aircraft have already moved toward the Russian border. This is the end. America will do everything for Ukraine. An incredible statement from the US that changed everything. Ukraine will be flooded with weapons. You need to hear this. Syrskyi urgently announced the AFU did something incredible. A total rout of the Russians that you have to see. A catastrophe in Russia with numerous casualties and losses. The country is literally being torn apart. And it seems that Ramzan Kadyrov is no longer alive. A shocking fact surfaced online and surprised everyone. All the most important details coming up in the new episode of Hotspot. No one expected this from Trump, nuclear ashes instead of Russia. A crucial decision has already been made. US nuclear facilities are ready to strike Russian territory. Ships are already moving into position. Details coming up.
The threat of nuclear war has knocked on Russia's door at the invitation of Dmitry Medvedev. Donald Trump has sent a clear signal to Putin with the current US president, nuclear blackmail will not work.
In response to the extremely provocative statements made by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be deployed to the appropriate areas in case these foolish and provocative statements turn out to be more than just words.
To underscore the seriousness of his intentions, in an interview with American media, the head of the White House first declared Washington's readiness for nuclear war with Moscow.
The former president of the Russian Federation started talking about nuclear weapons. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, we must be prepared. And we are fully prepared.
He then confirmed that US nuclear submarines have been deployed to the shores of Russia.
Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said some very bad things talking about nuclear weapons. He has said things like that before, so we must always be prepared. And that's why I sent nuclear submarines to the region. I just want to make sure that his words are just words and nothing more. Have they moved closer to Russia? Yes, they have moved closer to Russia.
And here, Putin's former placeholder in the Russian presidential seat miscalculated. Unlike most politicians, for Donald Trump, social media is the main battleground for both politics and business.
Iran and Israel need to make a deal, and they will, just as I made India and Pakistan make one, this time using trade with the US to bring reason, unity, and sanity to the negotiations.
What most people see as drunken rambling from the drunkard Medvedev for the US president is a reason to increase pressure and escalate.
Medvedev shot himself in the foot, but it's not even so much himself as the Russian Federation as a whole. He nullified all the previous decades of efforts by the Russian Federation at the very moment of nuclear blackmail by the occupying country against the United States and NATO countries. The United States essentially utilized the rhetoric and the very language of the Russian Federation, specifically aggressively rattling its nuclear weapons against Russia itself. A truly provocative and dangerous act. This is called mirroring.
In essence, a strategic shift has occurred in the relationship between Russia and the Western world.
The likelihood that Putin will start a nuclear war is much higher than many are willing to admit. It's a good thing that Donald Trump saw through the Russian regime. What's much worse is that nuclear policy is being dictated by messages on social media.
For all these decades, Russia's nuclear saber rattling has essentially been a kind of demonstrative rhetoric aimed at exerting informational and political pressure on Western countries to show Russia's resolve in the event of possible use of nuclear weapons. That's what this is about. This is what the entire foreign policy of the Russian Federation was based on.
Previously, the Russian dictator's trump card, nuclear blackmail, worked on both Europeans and the American administrations of Obama and Biden.
The aggressor must still know that retribution is inevitable, that he will be destroyed. And well, we are the victims of aggression, and we, as martyrs, will go to heaven, while they will simply die.
Now, however, Trump's actions and statements have shown that any further attempts by Russia to play with the atomic bomb will primarily bring nuclear clouds over Moscow and the Kremlin.
It's begun. Trump has decided to finish off Russia. Urgent official statement from the US State Department standing side by side with Ukraine until the end. China has unexpectedly spoken out. Russia's capitulation? Special Envoy Witkoff is flying to Moscow for a reason. Everything will be over soon. And will Trump bend the US to his will as well? The answer will shock you.
US President Trump reminded everyone that this Friday marks the end of the 10 days given to Putin, and Special Envoy Witkoff will be heading to Russia in the coming days. Moscow had strongly requested his visit.
Yes, there will be sanctions. But it seems they're pretty good at avoiding them. You know, they're cunning characters and they're good at dodging sanctions. But we'll see what happens. Steve, I think, will head to Russia this week on Wednesday or Thursday. They would like to see him. They requested a meeting with him, so we'll see.
This is precisely an attempt by the Kremlin to keep playing this game in which they lead the American administration by the nose, constantly promising some results in the peace process or at least a freeze of the war, while in reality they continue trying to seize Ukrainian territories and constantly carry out terrorist attacks on Ukrainian cities.
The Russian authorities have still not commented on Trump's statement about moving nuclear submarines in response to the nuclear threats made by an intoxicated Medvedev, and the federal TV channels didn't even mention the statement.
I have already made a statement. There was a threat from Russia, and I considered it inappropriate. And the answer is this: the nuclear submarines are already in that region where they are supposed to be.
At this point, it's more of a PR move by the American president. It's a reaction to Medvedev's words, who frankly isn't taken seriously, not just in the West, but even within the Russian political establishment. Therefore, I think that in this context, Russia is trying not to escalate and not to give Trump more reasons to take tougher actions against the Russian Federation.
In addition, Trump continues to put pressure on Russia's main economic allies. The Trump administration has already directly accused India of financing the war against Ukraine.
President Trump made it very clear that it is unacceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing oil from Russia. People will be shocked to learn that India, in fact, depends on China and on buying Russian oil.
As for India, politically, they do indeed belong more to the Western world. And the significant influence of the United States on India remains remarkably persistent, consistently stable, abundantly clear, and quite tangibly evident. Therefore, regarding secondary sanctions and India's participation in trade with the Russian Federation, such a move by the Trump administration could indeed affect the economic relationship between India and Russia.
The question regarding China remains open. The Middle Kingdom does not want to give up Russian oil. Western analysts claim that if China believes Trump will not back down from his intention to impose secondary sanctions and at the same time will increase military support for Ukraine, this could make the Chinese reconsider.
I think these will be 100% secondary tariffs. We expect that most of the Western alliance supporting Ukraine will follow this example, and anyone who buys Russian oil under sanctions should be prepared for this. The Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. We do not want to infringe on their sovereignty. So if they want to pay a 100% tariff, let them pay.
Yes, from an economic logic standpoint, it is of course much more beneficial for China to trade with the United States than to support Russia. At this point, yes, we can say that China has largely dropped its mask and is now openly stating that it will not let Russia lose this war. Therefore, I wouldn't draw any definitive conclusions yet about how effective American sanctions against Chinese companies might be, or whether, in this case, political logic from Beijing will outweigh economic benefit.
It seems that Trump is increasingly shifting from neutrality to supporting Ukraine. The US State Department has stated that America remains a reliable ally of Ukraine.
This administration is striving for a long-term, durable, and sustainable peace in the region. We want to continue standing side by side with Ukraine as Ukraine calls for a comprehensive and complete ceasefire that will stop any attacks on the civilian population and critical infrastructure.
But despite all the threats, according to statements made in the Kremlin recently, what Putin wants from Ukraine is capitulation, and he will not agree to a compromise.
As for any disappointments from anyone, all disappointments arise from excessive expectations. This is a well-known general rule.
It's interesting to consider just how far Putin is willing to go. After all, of course, sanctions mean nothing to him personally. It will be ordinary people who suffer from the dictator's unreasonable decisions, those very people who support him.
Urgent! Ukraine has achieved the impossible. The hellish trap has worked. Syrskyi has revealed the truth. No one has ever done what the Ukrainian Armed Forces have done. A sudden breakthrough on the front. Meanwhile, shocking news from Donetsk. The Russians have done something terrible. It will affect all of Ukraine. Right now, we will tell you the most important updates from the front. This will surprise you.
Long-suffering Kherson is once again under a massive attack by Russian occupiers. The day before, the enemy dropped 2 guided aerial bombs on the city, aiming to destroy the local bridge. As a result of the attacks, the road crossing leading to the Kadirovs neighborhood was seriously damaged. As can be seen in the footage, the bridge sustained serious damage with a gaping hole in the middle of the roadway. Nevertheless, the crossing has withstood the attack.
The bridge itself here.
Regarding the bridge, yes, there was a hit on the bridge. Russian propaganda has already managed to spread a fake about the destruction of the bridge, but it is still standing. Indeed, the bridge has sustained some damage. The roadway has been damaged.
By dropping a bomb on the only overpass leading to the Kadirovs neighborhood and cutting off the gas pipeline, the occupiers have trapped the residents of Kherson. Local authorities are urging residents to evacuate, as due to the serious damage to the bridge, it will be difficult to deliver food and other essential goods to the neighborhood for the time being.
There are certain logistical problems precisely because of the damage to this roadway. This affects the delivery of food and medicine, as well as the ability of emergency medical services and all other services to get in and out. It is precisely because of these logistical issues that we are emphasizing the need to consider evacuation from the Kadirovs neighborhood.
Meanwhile, local volunteers have already tested the damaged bridge for stability. After driving around the crater, they managed to reach the other side. However, it is unknown how long the crossing will last in this condition. The Kherson Regional State Administration also does not rule out repeated attempts by the occupiers to destroy the crossing, especially since the Russians have recently been resorting to new tactics of terror. According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, the most difficult situation on the front today is in the Pokrovsk, Dobropilya and Novopavlivka directions. The Russian army is using the tactic of total infiltration there and increasing sabotage activities behind the lines.
The enemy is intensifying efforts to capture our key agglomerations, searching for weak points in our defense, and conducting active combat operations simultaneously in several directions. In this way, they are trying to enter, in particular, Pokrovsk. However, Russian sabotage and small infantry groups are being neutralized. To effectively counter sabotage and reconnaissance groups, we have created and are deploying anti-sabotage reserves, whose task is to search for and destroy enemy sabotage groups.
By the way, our defenders from the anti-sabotage reserve announced by Syrskyi can already boast their first results. Thus, in temporarily occupied Melitopol, GUR agents blew up a car carrying Kadirovites. This unique operation was caught on video. It is known that the partisans managed to plant explosives in the occupiers' minivan, after which it exploded. At the moment of the explosion, fighters from the Akhmat unit were inside the vehicle. As a result of the detonation, at least 5 Kadirovites were killed. The explosion also wounded 2 invaders who were in a neighboring vehicle and destroyed a mobile electronic warfare complex. Thanks to the brilliant work of our defenders, the occupiers also experienced the shortest triumph of the entire war in Ukraine. It took exactly 24 hours for the fighters of the main intelligence directorate to drive the Russians out of the positions where they had hastily arranged a photo shoot with the tricolor. We are talking about the settlement of Zelenaya Rosha in the Donetsk region. There, after capturing the settlement, Russian soldiers tried to reach the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region and, in their excitement, hurried to report their success. However, just a day later, it was already the fighters of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine taking photos in the same spot. Nevertheless, analysts at Deep State are forced to admit that despite everything, the pace of the occupiers' advance on the front has not slowed. In July, it was roughly at the same level as in June. The Russian army managed to capture 564 square kilometers of our land. The analysts also broke down all directions of the front, clearly showing what percentage of lost territory and what percentage of assault actions fall on each of them. According to the statistics, the Pokrovsk and Sumy directions are the least effective for the Russian army. After all, it is precisely there that the enemy has to attack more often to achieve any success. However, the Novopavlivka direction is the most problematic for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. There, the enemy achieves greater success with fewer losses. For the other sections of the front, the breakdown is almost 1-to-1. And there's one more unpleasant piece of news from the front. The occupiers are doing everything they can to restore Donetsk airport in order to use it in the war against Ukraine. This is evidenced by recent satellite images. The fortifications that previously blocked the runway of what was once an international airport have already been covered over, indicating a likely preparation for its reuse. Construction work can be seen on the grounds of the former parking lots. Analysts suggest that a fuel and technical base is being prepared there. In addition, there is preliminary information about individual launches of Russian attack drones from the territory of the Donetsk air hub. And finally, some extremely discouraging news for the occupiers and for Putin personally. Ukraine has likely blown up the Kremlin's main gas pipeline in the Volgograd region. This concerns a section of the Central Asia Center pipeline, the third longest in the world. It is not directly stated yet that the explosion was carried out specifically by Ukrainian special services, but all indications point to this. According to analysts, the operation was likely carried out thanks to GUR agents in Russia.
That's all! Chechnya is literally being torn apart. Kadyrov has disappeared. The entire Caucasus is in an uproar. The Chechens did not expect this from their so-called leader. But the desperate attempts of his associates to save the situation have failed. Where is Kadyrov now? The answer to this question surprised everyone. Watch this.
First he almost drowned and now he's disappeared. Ramzan Kadyrov, who nearly lost his life at one of the foreign resorts, has not been in contact for a week. It all started with a sensational report in the Turkish media.
Around noon on July 24th, 48-year-old Kadyrov, who was vacationing at a luxurious hotel in the Kaynar district, went for a swim in the sea. As soon as he entered the water, he suddenly began to feel unwell. He started having trouble breathing. The Chechen Tsar was practically drowning. The hotel staff reacted instantly. Noticing that their high-profile guest was suffocating, the employees called for medical services and the Coast Guard. Coast Guard officers rushed to help, pulled the drowning Kadyrov out of the water onto the shore, and handed him over to the medics.
It would seem to be just an ordinary accident, but investigators noticed far too many inconsistencies in this story, especially regarding the rescuers who rushed to pull Ramzan out of the water. As an untouchable figure, he always travels on such trips surrounded by dozens of bodyguards who, in addition, also provide backup for the FSO officers. It's simply impossible to believe that there wasn't a single swimmer among them.
Any rescuer who dared to get within arm's reach of him would have undoubtedly ended up beyond anyone's help. This is because Turkey is also home to a truly huge number of both innocent victims of the Kadyrov regime itself, as well as the children of those individuals whom the Kadirovites brutally tortured to death, severely abused, or tragically killed. Accordingly, the security measures implemented around Kadyrov there are simply extraordinary and exceptionally stringent.
And it gets even more interesting. A few days later, while the rescued Kadyrov showed no signs of life, insider information began to surface. According to one of these reports, he didn't even try to go into the water. The illness struck the Don right on the shore.
Information started circulating among law enforcement saying that in fact things were much worse. His health was already in bad shape even when he was still on the shore. So he didn't swim, and they say that even in his current condition he wouldn't have been able to swim at all. Ambulances arrived, a lot of ambulances in fact. Apparently, well again, I definitely wasn't there myself. But basically he had health problems, they packed him up and took him away.
And here the question arises, what exactly happened? So, according to one of the most popular versions today, Chechen security forces staged a real performance just to secretly take the head of the Republic out for emergency medical treatment. After all, rumors about his poor health have been circulating for quite some time.
I suspect that this was about Kadyrov being hospitalized somewhere in Turkey because without a doubt the sanctions have primarily hit Russian healthcare. And apparently this whole story about his drowning and rescue, a man who is never left alone for even a second, he simply couldn't have drowned or choked on water when he's always surrounded by people, the most modest of whom probably holds one of the highest swimming qualifications. Accordingly, I believe this is just a special operation to legitimize his presence in Turkey.
According to the official version, after Kadyrov was brought back to normal condition, he flew back to Chechnya. And this cover story was also prepared in advance. For example, on the eve of July 30th, Ramzan Kadyrov posted a photo on his social media where he is playing chess with his son. However, it's hard to tell when the photo was actually taken. The greenery outside the window, judging by its shade, looks more like spring. And the fact that Kadyrov's son is wearing a hoodie, let me point out, it's over 30 degrees in Grozny right now. Well, this outfit suggests that the photo was taken in advance.
In general, lately he has put quite a lot of effort into proving that he is alive. All of this was happening against the backdrop of Kadyrov sharply reducing his work activity in recent months. After April 8th, he only personally held meetings twice, on July 4th and July 14th. Moreover, the meetings themselves did not look very convincing.
Meanwhile, in Chechnya itself, an unprecedented power struggle is brewing. Kadyrov is making a last-ditch effort to place his son Adam on the throne, but by law, he can't govern the republic until he turns 30. And the Kremlin isn't particularly eager to see a third Kadyrov on the throne either. According to analysts, they've already prepared their own successor there.
Apparently, we're preparing for Ramzan Kadyrov's funeral because at the same time as reports about his serious health problems, there's an obvious promotion of this Apti Alaudinov. It seems he will be the next chief over Chechnya, according to the Kremlin's plan.
However, who will actually lead Chechnya after Kadyrov doesn't return from his next hospitalization is still unclear. There are still plenty of opponents in the region to this kind of hereditary power, which doesn't grant the republic independence. So nothing has been decided yet. And given the number of news reports about Ramzan Kadyrov's condition, we'll find out soon enough.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Attention! Trump has delivered his verdict on Putin. The war will end this week. This is just explosive. A new deadline for reaching an agreement between Russia and Ukraine. How will Trump break Putin? Secret levers of influence revealed.
Unknown drones attacked the Volgograd region on the night of August 4th. Transport and energy infrastructure facilities were hit. Local residents report explosions over the cities of Mikhailovka and Frolovo. Regarding Frolovo, there are also reports of a fire at the railway station. Most likely, this is the Orkada station, which plays an important role in Russia's military logistics. It is through this hub that resources and equipment are supplied to support military operations. Apparently, it is no coincidence that Russia, in addition to its usual camouflage for aircraft, has begun building concrete shelters in cities near the border with Ukraine. Meanwhile, in the Belarusian city of Gomel, armored personnel carriers were spotted, some of which were equipped with anti-drone grills and bore unknown red tactical markings.
This may indicate a possible movement of Wagner PMC equipment. Let me remind you that up to 4,000 Wagner PMC personnel are currently in the territory of the Republic of Belarus, having been withdrawn both from the occupied regions of Ukraine and directly from the territory of the Russian Federation as part of an interstate agreement between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. The presence of this contingent is being used by the Russian Federation as an element of informational and military pressure, both on Ukraine and on Western countries, in the context of a potential escalation of military tension from the territory of the Republic of Belarus.
For several days now, Russian forces have been striking the Ostrovsky Bridge in Kherson. The Kherson Regional Military Administration has published a video showing holes in the road surface. A gas pipeline was also damaged, leaving one district without gas.
From a purely practical standpoint, the strategic strike on the vital bridge aims to effectively cut off the crucial logistics of the Ukrainian Defense Forces and thereby create optimal conditions for a significant landing operation on this particular island. This critically important bridge is in fact the sole and primary transport artery connecting directly to Kherson. But at the moment, there is no reason to talk about the possibility of a large-scale amphibious operation by Russian occupation forces in the Kherson direction.
The Russians plan to use temporarily occupied territories, including Donetsk airport, as launch sites for drones against Ukraine.
In other words, this creates additional difficulties for the Ukrainian Defense Forces in detecting aerodynamic targets as they approach Ukrainian territory.
The United States wants to use arms sales to NATO countries as a tool to pressure Russia in order to achieve an early ceasefire in Ukraine. This was stated by the U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Tucker, who in this context called U.S. President Donald Trump a peacemaker. Meanwhile, the NATO alliance itself is arming up. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur stated that NATO is considering the possibility of deploying a German-Dutch corps of its forces in the country.
The goal is to prevent the possible implementation of the so-called Suwałki corridor, that is, a direct invasion of Russian troops from the territory of the Republic of Belarus into Poland and the Baltic states. At the present moment, additional military contingents have already been strategically deployed in the city of Narva, and now the significant issue of further increasing the military presence in the Estonian coastal city of Pärnu is currently being carefully considered.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced additional deliveries of military aircraft to our country. According to him, Ukraine's goal is the full integration of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine with NATO forces. Zelensky also announced the approval of the next stages in the development of combat aviation, namely the acquisition of combat platforms and the implementation of steps to integrate Ukrainian forces with military partners.
There is a real catastrophe in Russia. Buildings are collapsing en masse with numerous casualties and losses. And this is not happening by chance. Is it horrifying negligence or is it a cunning act of sabotage? Right now, we're going to lay all the cards on the table, and what you'll hear will be shocking.
In Russia, the fourth residential building in a week has collapsed in Ufa. This time, no one was injured. A couple of days before that, an apartment building entrance collapsed in Astrakhan, and an office building collapsed in Yekaterinburg. And of course, the building in Saratov, where 7 bodies were pulled from the rubble. Putin himself has repeatedly promised to address the problem of such buildings. Eventually, he reported that the plans were being overfulfilled and that happy families were moving into new apartments.
Our comprehensive plans for the successful commissioning of key social and essential infrastructure facilities, as well as the crucial housing construction projects, are being consistently and effectively fulfilled. People can see the positive changes with their own eyes.
But the cases of building collapses are only becoming more widespread. Here, for example, is a building in Rostov-on-Don, a building that had been deemed hazardous for years.
There have been numerous statements and requests both to Golubev and the administration saying that our building has long been in an emergency state. There are reeds growing on the roof, everything is falling apart. Every morning we walk by, stones are falling, but no one is doing anything. How long has it been now? At least 4 years for sure.
As for the comprehensive restoration of these essential buildings, this crucial work should be fully completed by the very beginning of the upcoming heating season.
In Astrakhan as well, residential buildings have collapsed more than once.
A neighbor comes over and asks, "Is anything cracking at your place?" I say, "It is. Look, the ceiling panels are coming off up there." And right then it started cracking even more. Well, I realized things were bad. So I went outside, and right after me it collapsed.
We expect that this year a new record will be set for housing construction. Already, more than 87 million square meters have been put into operation. 3 million Russian families have improved their living conditions.
Another example is the Pisa house in the Zabaikalsky Krai, which, like the famous tower, is completely crooked and no one knows when it might collapse. But the authorities simply ignore the residents of the building. Apparently, they're waiting for the house to fall on the residents' heads so the problem will solve itself.
Well, sometimes you go to bed and think, what if, I just don't wake up and it collapses, where would I go? I have 2 kids and there's just nowhere for us to move. My apartment is on the 9th floor and it's literally slanted. So every time, for example, I go into the kids' room and see some bumps there, the walls crackling, the noise gets louder at night.
We, the residents of Syrskyi microdistrict, Building 39, are declaring an indefinite hunger strike. We live in Russia, a country that always helps everyone. We live in the Zabaikalsky Krai, which is very rich, but the poverty here is outrageous. Why is it that when Putin speaks on television and billions of rubles are allocated for the resettlement of dilapidated and emergency housing, there is, as always, no money for the unfortunate Building 39 in the Syrskyi microdistrict?
Across the country, the resettlement of citizens from emergency housing is progressing ahead of schedule. We constantly talk about this as well. People need to be moved out of the slums.
And these are just a few out of literally hundreds of cases. After all, if you look at these shots and listen to the residents' interviews, you might get the impression that this is a report filmed after a Russian missile strike in Ukraine.
The floor partially collapsed on the 3rd floor. My 3-year-old child was hanging in that hole, a boy climbing up that bed sheet my husband was climbing up, and... Well, we ran out, went into the vestibule and started to go down. But there was no entrance, no staircase, nothing across from the vestibule. There was simply no way to get to the apartment.
The ceiling is sagging and this middle part is constantly cracking. Maybe it's the floor slab, maybe something else. In short, we're always patching it up, whitewashing it. And this wall here, it's wooden and hollow inside, so it constantly warps in the fall and spring.
It started 3 years ago when bricks began to fall out in whole blocks. We wrote, we called, even went through the administration. It was useless. People were living on a powder keg, a mousetrap.
Everyone ran out at once. We expected that this situation would happen.
And why is that?
Well, because there were cracks, everything was falling apart.
Some might say it's karma. But the main question in this story is why couldn't they repair or build new houses with the billions that were spent on making rockets to bomb homes in another country?
It would have been better if they had given us apartments instead of fighting over there at all. They were fighting over there. They're at war, so much money is being spent there, that's it. And here we are suffering, struggling in these kinds of buildings.
But for the Russian authorities, the main thing isn't to take action, but to feed people the right kind of nonsense. And let people keep dying in slums.